Okay, so again, my name is Dr. Rossana Musetti, and I am the proud superintendent of schools for the Napa Valley Unified School District. Tonight, we are hosting our second community input session. It's the refinement of ideas that were presented in session 1. And the topic this evening, for those of you that might just be joining us, is the future of the Harvest Middle School site. So just as a quick synopsis, we did have our first community input session, and this is a continuation. For any of you who might be joining us for the first time, we do want to let you know that all materials and the video of the first input session are archived at nvusd.org and are there for your reference. I am joined tonight by the two critical staff members who I'm going to ask once again that they introduce themselves. Mr. Pearson.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Mike Pearson. I oversee operational services in the school district, and welcome to tonight's second presentation and community input meeting on Harvest Middle School. Thanks
for being here, Mike. And then our second staffer here tonight is Rob. Can you introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Rob Mangawala. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Business Services.
Great. So the three of us will be here, but tonight's content will be mostly facilitated by our consultant from Steinberg Hart, Ms. Katya McLean. I'm going to pass it over to Katya, who's going to launch the input session. I see there's a question about how many people are on tonight's call already in the Q&A, and we currently have 22 attendees. All right, take it away, Katya.
Thank you, Dr. Musetti. And to take a little bit of what we're going to do today, we have completed 2 of the 4 steps outlined in our engagement plan. We have completed the preliminary analysis of the site and the initial engagement input session. In this second meeting, we will refine the vision for the site, as Dr. Musetti mentioned, and we will clarify some pending questions. With all the input received, the recommended vision will then be presented in the third meeting, and that will include ideas and the priorities that will serve as the framework for the solicitation of a developer to execute the vision and come up with a formal plan. Next. A reminder that each one of these sessions build on each other, and our last session will be March 15th. And we're hoping that that will be in person, but please stay connected to the district website for additional information. Next.
And Katya, I just like to let the public who's attending again remind everyone we're jumping into session 2, February 22nd. If you missed session 1, all of that material is curated on the website. We will archive tonight's session also on the website. So if you know of people who have missed the opportunities, you can review the content and material at nvusd.org.
Thank you, Dr. Musetti. Next slide, yes. And a reminder of the guiding principles that we will follow in order to determine this long-term vision of the site. And they are to preserve the optimal number of assets for the use of the community at large, to maximize the district assets in order to optimize and generate revenue to educate our students, and to collaborate with the City of Napa on the vision for the Harvest site. We also want to remind you of what are the next steps and what's your role and what's the role of the City of Napa as well. The community input we have received will have defined, as I mentioned, the priorities or the vision of the site. Once we have completed the input session, the district's 7-11 committee will surplus the property, and then proposals from the developers will be requested. The district is selling the property, and in order to really maximize the value of the property, early collaboration with the city is very important. The land, of course, is more valuable if it's easy to develop, and we have that collaboration with the city very early on. After the sale of the property, the City of Napa will be in charge of approving the plans, and that includes approving the specific housing units and the community amenities that will remain on the site. Next. I'm glad that somebody was asking how many people were, in this session. A reminder, in the last session, we actually have 46 participants in English and the Spanish sessions. Next. One of the first things that we will do today is do a recap, as I mentioned, of what the first session was, the input that we received, and actually clarify some of the questions that we received and confirm the priorities that we are hearing. So one of the first questions that we ask is, what were those qualities or key thoughts that were important for the community? And a community access, community space, and affordable housing were mentioned over and over again. So you can see the larger the words are in this cloud, the more times they were mentioned by the community. We also asked how frequent the facilities were used. And Playground Fantastico is the one that the community uses most frequently. Next. And our final question was, what were those priorities to keep for the community? And Playground Fantastico, the soccer, football field as the second priority, and the pool also as the third priority for the community assets to remain. Next. So again, there's a lot of interrelationship in all the steps along the way. The district will sell the property, and before we get there, we need all this input to feed into the request for proposals, as you will see it later on be referred as RFP to the developers, and then the city approving the entitlement and building permit plans. Next. We appreciate all the feedback, the questions, all the comments that were given, and we categorize them into 5 different categories. And we'll use those 5 categories to guide us the discussion tonight. The first one was all about public assets. The second one, ownership and access. The third, housing. And the fourth one and the fifth one, we're going to combine them because they are more about next step and miscellaneous questions that came up during our input session last time. Next. So when we talk about public assets, this is what we heard, that the priorities again were to keep Playground Fantastico, to keep the soccer field, and to keep the pool. Something that is important to mention is that based in our assessment, we have identified, and the work with the district, we have identified that the football and soccer synthetic field is in need of repair. So actually, as we start thinking that we need to keep it, it may actually be better to have a new one. So keep that in mind as we continue, in this discussion. That also a priority is a community center or a community space, a space for adults and kids. And our notes and our assessment indicates that the existing gym, one of the existing gyms and the classroom space actually exceeds the size of the spaces that are Las Flores for rent. And another question that we wanted to clarify was, what about all the programs? There were a lot of comments about, can we have services? Can we have gym, swim classes? So we wanted to make sure that the community understand that the programs in those facilities will be determined after the time of the sale of the property and with and by the city of Napa. This is not something that we have to define at this moment. Next. The next category of questions were about, or comments were about ownership and access. The pool is currently owned by the district. There were also some questions about the solar panels. They are currently leased by the district with an option to buy them, but they are getting a little old. I mean, in our assessment, they're probably, pretty close, to their end of their lifespan. And the third item that we noticed, or that was asked, is Playground Fantastico ownership. So the land where Playground Fantastico is owned by the district, where the city of Napa maintains the playground. And most likely, the homeowner association of HOA will own the remaining community assets, and it will be recorded in the title that the community at large will have access to those facilities. So that recording in the title is how we can ensure that the input that we're receiving today, that the desires of the community stay throughout life of the project. Next. The next set of questions or comments were around housing. And the site size, the total access of the site, it's a little over 26 acres. If we keep Playground Fantastico, a football or soccer field, the pool, and one of the existing gyms, the acreage left is around 20 acres. So it starts giving you, and there's a visual on the left, it starts giving you, an idea of what areas are actually making sense to keep and how the development could work and how that vision is starting to take shape. The housing density and the infrastructure and all utility requirements will be determined and approved by the City of Napa. So those that had concerns about, do we have enough capacity in order to have these, that will have to be determined by the City of Napa, and requirements will be put into the development in order to ensure that that infrastructure and utility are met. And also a reminder that in order to maximize the district assets and generate the revenue to educate our students, 10 to 15 affordable units is recommended and aligned with the Napa Municipal Code. This is important to note that this is subject to still approval by the City of Napa as an alternative equivalent to paying affordable housing fees. And the last set of questions, categories 4 and 5, were about next steps and just general questions. So a reminder, a developer has not been selected yet. There will be an RFP or request for proposal process to select them. And how do we make sure that the input will be part of the final outcome? Again, with you in this input process, we will define those priorities and that vision to be included in the RFP process. The city is also interested and has been in these meetings listening to us, and they will be the ones that will have ultimate approval. So the district's role, again, to work with the city to create a vision that actually works, to have a developable land, the selection of the developer, and selling the property. And the City of Napa's roles, that will be the entitlement approvals, the building permit approvals, and they take over after the sale of the property for all the approvals and the specific programs and specific offerings on the site. So this is our first attempt at defining what those priorities are. And this list has been developed, gathering all the input that we got in the first meeting. And our job today is actually confirm this list and answer any questions related to this list that we believe encompasses everything that we have heard today. First would be key to continue putting the guiding principles as the forefront and meeting those guiding principles as we continue. Maintaining, and these are in no particular order. Maintaining Playground Fantastico and the pool, we heard that is a key priority. Having a football or soccer field, and notice that I said have one, because as I mentioned, the soccer field is in need of repair, at this point, and even the location, could be optimized a little bit. Also, create a community space or a community center. Deliver pedestrian and bike-friendly access to the community at large to these areas for a variety of programs. In order to maximize the district's assets and generate revenue to educate the students, provide 10 to 15% of all the units being affordable units, aligned with the Napa Municipal Code. And again, subject to their approval, but this is the goal. And also, and lastly, to honor the history of the site. This could be in the name of the development and a plaque that is on the side, but not forgetting where this development came from. So I will pause now and we'll move to our Miro board to gather some of the questions that the community may have. And also we want to hear from you if we are on the right track with these priorities and what we're seeing as the guiding principle, as the principles to follow in the entire development. So if you have any question at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button that you can type your answer, and we'll be happy to respond to any questions, gather the input, and if we don't answer to all the questions, we will answer them at the next meeting. On the left-hand side, you will see those are the items that we have categorized as important and as valuable from all the input that we have received from the community. And for the person that asked how many people, we've reached 39, at this moment. One of the first questions about, the soccer field and how old is the soccer field? And I may need to ask Mike Pearson if you have that time, of what, if you have any ideas of what that, how old the soccer field is.
Yeah, just a second here. Let me see if I have it on this document I'm pulling up as I look at it. The synthetic field was replaced in 2011. So the soccer field was redone in 2011. You typically get a warranty from the manufacturer of anywhere from 8 to 10 years on that particular field. So it's getting near the end of its lifespan. There's a bunch of tests that the industry performs on those tests, rated more towards really high contact sports such as football and whatnot. But it's in that ballpark range where we would like to see where the field maybe reaching its lifespan, but it's still playable at this point.
An estimate for field replacement, Mike?
Yeah, they typically, it depends on the soil conditions underneath the actual field itself. We were averaging, when we replaced other fields over the past 2 years, between 900,000 to 1.1 million.
I'll go into, why are we doing this? Can the property be sold as is? Does this need to be rezoned? And I see Vin Smith, from the city of Napa on the call, and maybe Vin, if you're available, I may need a little bit of your help there. But currently schools are zoned as public and quasi-public. That means, that they are designated as schools. Parks also follow in a very similar category. And yes, there will need to be some rezoning after that in order to convert that. So Vin, do you want to expand a little bit?
Sure, be happy to. Vin Smith, Community Development Director for the City of Napa. Just a quick sound check. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep, good. So currently the property is designated public. It's actually, the technical term is public, quasi-public. Through our current general plan update, we are looking to provide housing density ranges for all of the Napa Valley Unified School District campuses in anticipation of housing needs. Part of our strategy for not expanding our boundary is to look inside at potential development opportunities, certainly not predicting or precluding any of the opportunities that the school district might take, but just being ready in case that happens. So this property will get a residential designation to it as a result of the new general plan. It will need to be rezoned. That would be normal in a large development project of this size in the city of Napa. So that would be an anticipated action that would happen as part of the development review process.
I also just want to add, and maybe Mr. Manguala can expand on this. We shared the 3 guiding principles in session 1. Katya went over them again right now briefly. But in order for the school district to meet one of its guiding principles, which is to maximize revenues, because our goal is, our mission as an institution is education, right? That is our priority. So part of the reason, when we consolidate schools and have to do the difficult work of school closures in response to declining enrollment, there was a question of why close Harvest. We've been having to do this work due to declining enrollment. We were a district once of over 19,000 that's slated to go down to 14,500. So we have to consolidate in order to be able to protect educational programming and run more efficiently. But we have this tension, right? We need to be able to maximize the revenue we get for the property in conjunction with the other two principles. And the reason is because the money generated from the sale of the property puts the district in a better financial position to be able to take less pressure off of its general fund. So the entitlements of the property actually help us with maximizing the revenue, right? Can it just be sold as is? Well, with the as is right now, we don't have the entitlements that would position the district to meet that guiding principle of maximizing revenue generation. So I don't know, Rob, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, if I could add to that too, Dr. Massetti. So the other component of it is the school district and the city both have a shared interest in housing. So we know that there's an enormous shortage of housing. Without housing, we don't have students in Napa. So we know that it does help fill that niche of city meeting their housing goals. School district also, in terms of from our perspective, the funds from the sale of the property could be put back into our other facilities. And generally speaking, housing is considered the highest and best use for property in terms of getting the maximum value. So some of the other questions I've seen, like, can this be put aside for a sports center? Sports centers generally do not develop the type of funds that you would get from housing. And then again, there is an enormous shortage of housing in the area, along with reduced cost housing. So we are trying to balance that.
Thank you, Rob and Dr. Massetti. This is quite important to remember those guiding principles, because we want to preserve some assets for the community at large and balance that need with the need of providing the highest revenue for the site. So that's where the compromise comes of keeping some of the facilities, not all of them, but still allocate some area of the site for housing, and housing being determined the use that can provide that maximum revenue for the site.
Katya, on that note, do we want to field a couple of the questions that are coming in regarding inclusionary affordable housing?
Yes, there was a question of why 10 to 50% affordable housing. And again, we believe that a combination of market rate housing, probably the biggest revenue will come if all of it was market rate housing. But with the district, we believe that in order to be good to the community and provide, and be good neighbors, at the same time, we needed to provide that some type of percentage of affordable housing. And that's what we determined. And again, this is subject to the approval of the city of Napa, that 10 to 15% is probably what the city of Napa will consider equivalent to paying the fees, in lieu fees for affordable housing. Ben, I don't know if you want to add anything else in terms of housing and affordable housing, for the city.
I think it's a very good question. I think it's a question that putting a range on it shows the commitment from the school district that the project's going to have affordable housing integrated, included. That's the inclusionary statement. The process is a little bit more complicated one that the city would go through that establishes what an acceptable equivalent is. That's a city council decision that's made at the time that the project's being evaluated. So that the balancing act of whether there's fees paid and housing, or it's all satisfied with housing on site, is probably a project decision to be made. So that's probably the best way I can answer that question.
Thank you. There was another question about both gyms and why only leaving one. And again, we believe that we cannot keep every single facility in order to have a cohesive area that it could be developed for housing. And we think that the newer gym is the one that has a longer lifespan. The other one was built originally in the 50s. It has been renovated, but that the newer gym, and its location actually close to the pool would actually be a good asset to remain for the community. And it has a large gym, it has restrooms, has a full-size, basketball court, restrooms, and a classroom adjacent to it that could also be used by the community for those services for adults and kids. A reminder that the services that could be provided in this community center will probably be determined a little bit later. So the questions about, can we have community food access, a food bank, maybe even a farmer's market, those type of services or amenities could actually be discussed later on, on what, in certain space that could be brought to the site.
There's a question about the earliest possible date of the property being sold. Rob, do you want to field that one?
Sure. So again, right now we're just gathering community input. So the process would include starting a 7-Eleven committee, which we would probably look at doing sometime in the fall, followed by production of an RFP. I would probably say at the earliest, the property would be for sale around this time next year.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, some of the assets that are on the site could be used for the new development. So for example, the solar panels could be used, but as I mentioned, they are currently leased by the district. They're not owned by the district. So it will have to be some type of arrangement, but it's not something that we have considered them right now. The developer can come and actually add solar panels in the future. I'll talk a little bit about, we talk in the presentation about access and ownership, but we did not discuss maintenance. And yes, the district, will not be part of maintenance after the sale of the site. The district has nothing to do anymore with the site. So can we trust, how can we ensure that these will be maintained and that the community's best interest will stay at the forefront? Ben, do you mind if I put you on the spot a little bit about, possible maintenance and, and keeping up with the facilities?
Sure. So the part of the development application would include an agreement between the developer and the city as to how some of these new facilities that might become public facilities be maintained. And it's one thing to preserve them and use them for public facilities, which I think we all intend to do. It's another thing to maintain them over time. And so the financial package that would be part of the negotiation with the city and the developer would include how to pay for these new public improvements over time, specifically if the pool and the gym are retained and there is a new field that's installed, and those items would be included as part of a negotiation, whether it's an assessment district on this development or some other way that the developer could fund assistance with that long-term maintenance. But it wouldn't just be the city assuming responsibility. There'd be an agreement.
Thank you, Vin.
Mm-hmm.
There's another question about affordable by design. And we talk a lot about this in new developments. And yes, it could be included as one of the priorities, to encourage the units to be affordable by design. That means that that there's also some part of the development, or that the entire development could be made more affordable rather than make it luxury homes. So that's something that we need to discuss with the district of what's the ultimate goal, but definitely being affordable by design is something that is easy to do and could be encouraged by the developers to put in their proposals. Requirements about open space. Definitely the city has some requirements, about open space, and the city of Napa will will require additional open space. And if open space is not provided, most likely they will be also paying fees, that help minimize the burden of a new housing development for the city of Napa. Ben, anything that you may want to add? Did I answer correctly?
Yeah, you did. Yep.
There was a question about bonds, and I'm not really sure that we could answer it right now, but I will put it out for everybody. If the gym and some other facilities were paid by previous bond issues, how will we continue to pay for this in the next 20 to 30 years? So Rob, do you mind answering that question, or do we want to keep it, for future discussion at the third meeting?
I'd have to redo a little research into that. So, and I can follow back with Mr. Beck about that. So typically school districts do not have the ability to prepay bonds. Again, it depends if they're callable. There's a lot of different things that go into it, just like a refinance. So typically when a bond is issued against, or a school district issues a bond, they're not repayable early typically. So again, that depends on the language.
Thank you, Rob. So yes, we'll probably need to clarify that one, that specific question later on. There's a question about the type of housing. Would it be homes and apartments? And we are envisioning that is probably a good mix. We'll show you during the last meeting, we'll show you how the context has some single family residential and multifamily residential. And we believe that a combination of both would probably be best also for this site.
Just in terms of the housing questions that are alluding to some alternative funding streams, et cetera, in order to support more inclusionary housing. Can we speak to that, Katya and Ram?
Sure, absolutely. Katya, do you want to start, or would you like me to jump in?
Why don't you start? I'm reading that question.
Yeah, so in terms of pursuing grants and so forth for more inclusionary housing, if that's available, yes, we would want to encourage a possible bidder on the property to obtain something like that. So again, it really depends, right? So ultimately, we're going to have to do some, publish an RFP. We can definitely, again, which stands for a request for proposals, and we can encourage it to be higher, but that doesn't, we can't necessarily mandate it. It depends on the money and the funds that are out there at the time.
Yes, there are different funds available for affordable housing. So if there's a developer that comes, with a great plan with additional funding, that could be considered, but it's not something that we will mandate from the beginning.
Yeah, and then just as a reminder, there is a cost to that, right? So that the cost is borne by the district when they sell the property, and then the developer. So, in terms of making a project economical, it's based on the number of housing units that are able to be developed on the property. The more the units and the less restrictions, the more valuable the property. The reverse is also true. So when you put in inclusionary housing, sometimes the amount can actually create a scenario where the lot is negative in value. So again, we do have to pursue grants as much as possible, but again, typically you don't go much beyond this unless there's an enormous grant.
And that is the balance between maximizing the assets and preserving, the land, and preserving some of those some of those buildings for public access as well. How much do we keep versus how much land do we leave, for housing? There's a question about traffic, and we haven't done, a traffic analysis. We haven't determined if actually there will be more trips generated by housing, or how many trips are currently generated by the school. That is actually quite significant, if I'm sure that you guys know, trying to park, in that area. But that is definitely something that is reviewed by the city of Napa at the time of the approval of the entitlement set. So the city will not allow, a large development if they don't mitigate, the impacts for parking and access to the site. Okay. Similar with parking, for the actual, development, parking will also be something that the city will determine what are the key requirements for parking. There's another comment about housing, about home ownership, and multifamily housing. So Rob, do you want to go into the specifics of, or a little bit more into what we think, the best value would be, for the housing of the site, on the site?
Can you rephrase the question, Katya? I didn't understand the question.
That the neighborhood, there's a lot of multifamily housing and rentals in the neighborhood, and there's a need for home ownership. So can we talk about, what we're thinking, after the sale of the property?
Absolutely. So we are working very closely with the city in terms of what matches the charm of the neighborhood. Based on what we're seeing now, it would be a variety of different types of homes. If you look at the area right now, you'll see in parts of it, there are single family homes, typical single family homes. And there's also condominium type homes, more dense housing in other parts of the property, depending on as you rotate in a circle around it. So again, we are looking at a balance and we'll be working very closely with the city to make sure that it matches the charm of the area. Vin, is there anything you'd like to add to that? Did I cover that correctly?
No, you covered that well. I think I just want to, I made this point at our last public meeting, and I want to make it again this evening, that the design of the project isn't going to happen here. The design of the project will happen once a developer is selected and that developer begins the pursuit of getting a project approved. There'll be more public hearings on the specifics of the project once that developer is selected and that application is made. The Planning Commission will have public hearings as well as the City Council, who will be ultimately the approving body.
I'm sorry, Katya, there's a specific question. So I think it helps flesh out for clarity because there's a lot of similar questions kind of phrased a little differently. So this is, I think, good natural, like just let's get specific. Is the school district finding the buyer and approving the development plan, or are we just finding the buyer? And does the developer have to have a fleshed out plan to be considered a qualified buyer?
Yeah, so then in terms of determining who the buyer is, again, the district is going to work closely with the city to ultimately publish the RFP. The RFP is technically the school district's responsibility to not only publish it, but then to also, we would be the one who would choose the buyer, the school district will. Now we work with the city ultimately because we want to publish an RFP that ultimately the final plan will be approved by the Planning Commission and the City Council, right? So we can go through all this work, we can pick a buyer, we can start with a plan, but if we don't work closely with the city and they don't approve it, then it doesn't work. So it's in all of our best interests to kind of roll up our sleeves and work shoulder to shoulder. But ultimately, it is the school district that picks the buyer and works closely with the buyer to get this all the way through to final map. Ultimately, typically what happens if you look at what we did with Vintage Farm, the school district gets the funds, the final release of the funds at tentative map, which is approved by the city. Vin, did I miss anything?
No, you got it, Rob.
The range of zoning options on the property, it's kind of a question directed the city of Napa. This would be your expertise. So there's examples like traditional residential, medium density, high density. What's the general kind of zoning?
I think that we're interested in looking at all of the above. It's a property that has common boundaries with single family detached traditional neighborhoods with attached higher density multifamily neighborhoods. It's borders an arterial street adjacent to Highway 29. So I think there are advantages to it. There are complications with it as a residential development site, but I think there's opportunity for a very broad range of housing types.
And that is actually what makes, the land actually developable. It is easy to develop when there's a multiple, a combination of different housing types. That makes it also, appeal. There's an appeal for developers to propose in something that can have some variety rather than being very prescriptive on exactly specifics, of what the property, may have to be. So it's important to give the developers also the ability to come up with some proposals that then can be evaluated before the sale of the property. But a reminder that the district is selling the property. So at the end, the ultimate approvals for entitlements and building permits resides with the city of Napa.
Katia, if I could add one thing there. So when we say we're selling the property, it's kind of like, it's like a long selling of the property. We enter into a contract, and that we don't enter into a contract and then we get a check. We enter in a contract, we continue to work with the developers throughout the process with the city. And it might take a year, 2 years for that to kind of wrap up. So it is a long process. So even though we're talking about potentially having a property for sale in the spring of next year, we'll continue to work with the city, whatever developer is ultimately chosen, and we'll be going back and forth on the details and continuing this work for, again, my guess is, 3 years from today, it's completely done. Would probably be a quick timeline.
There's a lot of questions around screening for potential buyers and how we go about screening, preliminary screening, before going directly to an RFP.
Absolutely. So as a part of the process of evaluating buyers, obviously we look at the amount of their bid and their ability ultimately to finish, right? So you're going to look for a really good a company that's done business, potentially even done business in Napa and knows the area. So one of the things that we did look at with our previous buyer is someone who's actually completed deals with Napa and is familiar with working with the city. So we're not going to just pick, for example, we're not going to pick the highest bidder that doesn't have the ability to actually deliver on the sale of the property.
I think there's also an interest based on some of the inquiries around screening for somebody who has expertise in affordable housing.
Absolutely. That's a part of it.
I've been scanning through most of the questions. I don't see anything else. Dr. Musetti, are you seeing any additional questions?
A couple of questions. It seems like concerns emerging regarding increased traffic and the impact that'll have around entrances and exits for Highway 29.
Yeah, so absolutely, I can answer that. So then typically for something like this, you would do a traffic study and they look at round trips. So for a school district, for example, typically if you think of the number of people that go into a school and the number of round trips and the average miles that they go across the city, schools typically have a fairly large impact. So if you were to just do the math and think about the number of families that come in and out of a school on a given day versus the number of families that would come in and out of housing, my back of the envelope math would say typically it would be less. I don't know, Ben, do you have any comments about that? I mean, there would be an analysis that would be completed, but my guess it would be less for housing versus a school.
Yeah, I frankly haven't analyzed the traffic impacts of a school in some time, so I probably would want us to just say we will definitely look at it. I think it's the point made by you, Rob, is that there's a net change there, whether it's positive or negative. It's a net change because the campus is generating quite a bit of traffic currently. So future development would be analyzed in light of that.
Yeah, so I mean, we did do a traffic analysis for school closure, so I'm somewhat familiar with it. So for both of our school closures, typically you would look at 4 trips. You would look at 2 round trips because you're looking at drop off, go home, drop off, go home, and you would calculate that based on the number of miles for each parent's home address, and come up with total miles, something along those manners. And so again, we would have to do a comparison of that, but my back of the envelope would be that it would be less, but that would be part of the process.
There's questions about other properties. So we still own Yountville, and that has not been sold, and we're actively seeking entitlements. Again, entitlements are the key to the district maximizing revenue. So that's always a goal, is to make sure that we have the appropriate entitlements that will maximize revenue so that we can pursue our mission as an organization, which is to educate. I know that the properties bring opportunities for which, you know, put pressure on the district to consider solving kind of other complex issues in the community. And, you know, we can be contributors to that to an extent, but it goes back to those guiding principles. Our primary mission is education. And so when we go to deal with any of our properties, we do have to pay attention to the revenue attained. And I just want to speak to that sort of transparently early on in this process, because the revenue generated from property sales puts the district in a position to use the return, the revenue return on sales, to then put back into other schools where children are getting educated, right? So we have lots of facilities needs. We have roofs, we have, you know, a portable replacement, all kinds of just basic facilities needs to keep our kids warm, safe, and dry. And so again, our priority is education, keeping kids warm, safe, and dry in their educational context. So that will always be top of mind for us as we engage in these property matters. Will the entire property be off limits to the public once the school closes? No. The community assets are going to continue to be accessible to the community.
Dr. Masay, yeah, and that is going to be a little bit of a balance, right? So they'll be accessible to the community, but what we have to look at too is how do we keep the community, keep that space safe in this kind of transition space a little bit. So there's a transition between the property as it sits right now and then what it looks like when it's finally sold. So there'll be some transition years, but absolutely the community will have access to that. And then the question about profit. So I just want to just add one small piece. So the school district is not pursuing a profit. What the school district is pursuing is trying to do the best for their students who are sitting in facilities that need work. A lot of our facilities do need work. And the goal is to make those facilities warm, safe, and dry, as Dr. Massetti pointed out. So it is not about pursuit of profit.
The current attendance at Harvest, Rob, the latest numbers, I don't know if you have them at the tip of your current Harvest enrollment this year.
I do not know the numbers off the top of my head, but we know that they are lower this year than the previous year.
Yeah, but approximately.
I don't know the number off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and double check, Dr. Massetti. If you give me a couple of minutes, I'll look it up.
Okay, school bus parking zone and school buses still continue for students in the local Harvest community? Yes. We are actually expanding and providing more transportation given the decision around school closure. There's more, there will be a hub, a transportation hub to ensure that students that live in that neighborhood will have access to transportation to the school that they will be attending next year after the closure is implemented. We're just scanning here.
Some additional questions came up, but again, a reminder, that if it comes to traffic and parking, the city will be the ultimate decision maker of what those requirements are and what needs to be done to on-ramps and off-ramps, and parking on the site in order to minimize the impact.
There's a question regarding removal of structures before the sale. I'm not sure what structures are being referenced to. Maybe you could be more specific. Hi, Mr. Teef, it's good.
I
to
mean,
see you.
I can answer that.
Okay.
Yeah, so typically when you sell a property like that, we're pursuing entitlements, but it's really just in broom swap condition, meaning the school district wouldn't enter into a contract where we would be required to remove things. So typically the developer would figure that into the final price that they give to us. School districts do not have the ability to, for example, tear down a building or something like that. That's what a developer would do.
Correct. So to clarify, the property will be sold as is, and then the developer is the one that is in charge to make those improvements. That's why it's important to, and I continue to emphasize that there's a sale of the property, because at the end, the developer will be ultimately responsible for make those improvements based on what the City of Napa requirements are for utilities and infrastructure.
Okay.
All right, so Jackie, do you mind scrolling back to the list that we have on the left? So based on what we hear, and most of the things that we heard were most on the questions and access, but I think these initial priorities still stand, based on the initial input that we have gathered in these two meetings. Maintaining Playground Fantastico, the pool, that new soccer field, I still think, that, based on the lifespan of the current synthetic field, probably needs to be replaced. Keep one of the gyms to be this community space, this community center that has a large space where sports can be played, services can be done. Pedestrian and bike friendly access to the community at large to these areas. So this will not be a gated community where the community cannot go in. Public assets will remain and the public will have access to those facilities. Keep some level of affordable housing, to maximize the revenue that the district can generate, but also just work with the City of Napa and different developers in order to get, to what the optimal solution would be. And again, remember that there's some history on the site that it can be honored, at the end, and as part of this development. Is there any other questions or anything that we missed? I know that there were a lot of questions about parking. I don't know if we need to put that as a priority, but definitely we know that for sure the City of Napa will have their own requirements. There will be another actually community engagement process in order to talk in more specifics once the developer comes with a proposal. Okay. I'll wait a couple of minutes and see if there are any additional answers. To an RFQ prior to an RFP, you will get a better idea of intent. That is correct. I mean, sometimes there is a request for interest, that it could be even an RFI to see how many developers, are interested, then do qualifications and then do an RFP. So we can confirm with the district what the preferred approach is. But Rob, confirm, Clark, or please correct me if I'm wrong, but the other property, the district went directly to an RFP process, correct?
For the Vintage Farm?
Correct.
Correct. We did publish an RFP for that. Correct.
Okay. All right. We have based on the input that we had received, we had put some preliminary thoughts on a site plan, and you have to forgive me, sometimes as a planner, as an architect, as you start defining different zones, you want to start putting things on paper and see if they start making sense. So if the Playground Fantastico stays, that's what is noted. Thank you, Jackie. But it's not on the top, of the site. If rather than keeping the existing soccer field that is in need of repair, we have a new one, and it moves a little bit closer, to Playground Fantastico. If we keep the pool and one of the gyms, and there may be some ability to have some additional, green space in that area, we still think that there's a good area that is left for housing. And as I mentioned before, there's probably, around 20 acres of land that could be developed for housing. So this is our preliminary attempt to get something and start getting some thoughts on actually the site plan. But as Ben mentioned, this is not at the time where we will design, what the site would look like. This is just general ideas, and we're just trying to make sure that everything that is discussed, and the priorities can be achieved, within the site. So if there are any questions about the site plan. And thank you for the person that, that asked about the enrollment. The current attendance is about 525. The person is mentioning that his wife is a teacher, at the site. So that's probably a good number, a ballpark number to start. All right, I don't see any additional questions or initial reactions to the zoning site plan, or what we sometimes call as a bubble diagram, where we just start locating things on the site. Any additional questions? Dr. Musetti or Rob, anything that you may want to, I don't see Mike, but he may be off my screen. Anything else that we would want to mention?
No, I want to thank everybody for their attendance tonight, and maybe we can just sunshine for everybody what the plan is in session 3. Yes, the plan would be to go back and relook at all the input. Thank you, Jackie. Go back all the way to the right where the orange is. There you go. Thank you. So our last meeting is when we would come with a recommendation on what that vision is, what those priorities are, and what would be included as those must, in the RFQ for the consultant. Somebody was asking, can we do an RFQ or P? We just need to confirm with the district what is the desired approach in order to get to, to an RFP or request for proposal process. So again, the last meeting, it will be March 15. Do I have my dates? Correct, March 15, same time, and we will have a recommendation based on all the input that we have had. Right, and the 15th, just as a reminder for all attendees, is slated to be a hybrid format. Please, before the 15th, just double check, confirm by going to nvusd.org. But right now, the plan is for it to be hybrid. You'll be able to come onto the campus. We will offer the meeting both in person plus Zoom access. So there'll be a little bit of complexity to community engagement at that session, trying to accommodate both online and potentially in person. If those plans change around meeting format, it will be posted on nvusd.org. So just please do a double check before March 15th. And we'll try and also keep that information live and updated in our communication channels, social media feeds, etc. Okay. So I think with that, we can say good night. Again, thank you for your engagement. Your input is very, very important to us. It's important to hear what the community's reaction is to the work unfolding, to hear your voice as we shape the future of the Harvest site. And we look forward to the third session, and we'll see you on March 15th, potentially in person or online.
And a reminder, visit the website. There is information there of how to submit additional input if you were not being able to participate in the meetings, but we'll encourage people to participate in the meeting, even if it's just the last one.
Great. All right. Good night, everyone.